Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today whose name I can pronounce. Emily Hardy, welcome to Imperfect Momming.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here and to have this conversation with you today.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name is Emily Hardy. I am a mindset coach for moms. I work with moms on really their mindset around self-care and taking care of themselves and what that means. A lot of moms, kind of fail to prioritize themselves because there's so many other things that seem to take priority, big one being our kids, right? But I really work with moms to help them see the importance of prioritizing their own care and kind of redefining what that care actually means, what that looks like, so that they can feel more fulfilled and really just like themselves again, and dream big and follow those dreams, and all of that without guilt, because that is something that so many moms face when it comes to prioritizing themselves.
Absolutely. I can't get enough of this topic just because as a mom, I've, gone in and out of phases of self-care, and, for me, it's like looking back, I can see where I was doing the best mentally, emotionally, physically, and what I was doing. And that was kind of like a jumping off place for me. Like, what was I doing where I felt the best? Like, I'm not in a good place right now. Where can I start? What's one little thing? And I know for me, I like my me time. Yes. Right? I like a break where it's like I don't have to take care of anybody but me.
I feel that.
Yeah.
It is something that is so valuable to all of us, but some of us really do need, like, that space really is such true self-care, like just having a little bit of space, and it's hard to get sometimes.
Yeah. And and it's different every day for me. Like I find it every day. I actually read a quote or a meme or something yesterday that said, there's 24 hours in a day. One of those hours should be dedicated to you. And I was like, yes, I love that. Like, that's 1/24 of a day. Like, you can give yourself an hour, and if you have to build up to that, start with 15 minutes, but like, get to that hour. And so I'll wake up at 5 a.m. and I laugh because sometimes it's hard. But then there's also not being super rigid with myself and saying, no, I have to get up at 5. Last night, as we're recording this, it was the 4th of July. And, I got home a lot later than I was planning, and I fell asleep a lot later than I anticipated after getting home. And the alarm went off at 5, and I literally remember thinking, it can't be 5. I just closed my eyes. And I just I turned the alarm off because I have another alarm that tells me that I need to get ready for the day, like the me time is over.
Yeah.
And I just slept until that second alarm went off because I just needed, like, I'm a firm, I need 8 hours of sleep person. And 100% it was like, no, I need to go back to sleep. And just before we jumped on the recording, I was taking a nap because I still didn't get enough.
Well, and what I love about that is that when we think about self-care, and I mean, I'm sure anyone hearing the term self-care, there's all kinds of things that come to mind. And it's something that if you've really worked on understanding what self-care actually means, it might be layers of things, but really it's taking care of yourself, right? And so especially for busy moms, like, yes, getting that me time is crucial. And so knowing, okay, I'm going to make this that, I'm waking up at 5 a.m. If that's the way you're making sure that you're getting that me time, that's amazing. But if you're thinking about it in terms of like, this is care, well, getting 8 hours of sleep is also a way that you're caring for yourself. And so, okay, that might trump the me time in the morning because it's what you need. It's meeting that need. And so I think that's such an awesome way to kind of give yourself that time, but also to give yourself that flexibility to not make it just something else you have to do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of compassion for myself lately because I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast that I'm a surrogate. I don't believe that I've mentioned that I'm carrying twins. And it came as a bit of a shock because that wasn't part of my plan. They only transferred one embryo, so this little girl wanted to be two. But there was a good period of time. I'm just listening to the cats like claw at the drapes, right? There was this period of time where I was so nauseous that it was hard to do anything. And I would literally come home from whatever it was that I had to do, and I would lay down in bed. And sometimes I would fall asleep, and sometimes that was like at 3:00 in the afternoon, and I would be done for the day. And the whole house fell apart. The laundry, like we were wondering, where's the towels? And the kitchen wasn't running as smoothly as it normally does. And it was very validating to hear my boyfriend say, like, I didn't think that you did a lot around here, but as soon as you stopped, the whole place fell apart. It's like the best kind of validation, right? And luckily my doctor was going to give me Unisom to take for nausea, and we were like, so the solution is to put me to sleep. And I was like, that's been my solution. Like, but she was saying I wouldn't be able to drive, and I was like, I really need to drive. So she gave me something else, and that was a prescription, and I only had to take like 3 tablets, and now it reset everything. I don't know what it did as a magic pill, just reset everything. And now I feel normal again. And I'm like, oh, I could do the laundry.
You can take care of other things besides just getting sleep and not being nauseous. That's
and I was happy about being able to do the laundry because I like to have towels when I take a shower. Right.
Yeah. It's always nice when it's running at least smooth enough, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it was like, but the point of bringing all of that up was the grace that, it's like, yeah, okay, everything fell apart. We all still did have food. We all still had, clothes to wear. Occasionally we needed to wear a robe instead of a towel when we got out of the shower, but nobody died. Right? Like, I think a lot of times we catastrophize, like, if I don't get it done, and it doesn't get done, then the world's going to end, and it's not that way. And so there's lots of compassion.
And it's so crucial. Like, it's so crucial, especially, I mean, you're going through a lot right now. Your body physically is going through a lot. And so it's like you have to be gentle with yourself and know, okay, there may be differences in what I'm able to do, and I have to care for myself in a different way to accommodate that. But then I completely agree with that, where sometimes we can feel like everything has to be on our shoulders and we have to take care of everything and we have to take care of everybody else. And yeah, normally I can fit the self-care in and I can take care of my own needs, but right now my needs are greater than I would like them to be. And it's knowing that it doesn't all have to fall on your shoulders. Obviously you need to take care of your children, and you know, there's things that need to get done, but it doesn't have to be this all or nothing. Oh no, the world's going to fall out from under me. And obviously your situation is, you know, there's a layer of, yes, having a twin pregnancy, I'm sure, is totally exhausting. And with nausea, there's like a kind of a reason, I guess, where you can feel like, okay, I need to give myself grace right now, but the reason doesn't have to be so obvious or so physical to allow ourselves that grace.
Yeah, you can have like a really tough week at work and or have toddlers, and just need some space. Like, it doesn't have to be surprise pregnant with twins or anything. It can be something small, but and because I can really go in hard on myself if I want to. And that's an old pattern of mine, where I would just, whip myself into shape and like force myself to go. And it's like, I'm not doing that this time. I'm older than I've ever been, carrying more babies than I've ever carried. And I'm just going to let it go, and let go and let God for as long as necessary. And ultimately it ended up being 2 or 3 weeks. It felt like 4 years, but it was like 2 or 3 weeks ultimately. So tell me how you got into this niche. Like, what was the catalyst for you?
So my background is in education. I have been an elementary school teacher, and I have 2 little boys. So my first son, he is almost 4, and then and I had him pretty young. I had him when I was 23, and my second son turned 1 a few months ago now.
So I hit you right in square in the teeth when I said toddlers.
Right. I mean, I am living it. And a lot of times our clothes are not, they might be clean, but they're not put away, right? Like it's I'm right there living that. When my second son was born, I had been in the middle of a year teaching remotely, and we all were going through so much during, the 2020, 2021, like there was a lot going on in the world. We were all going through a lot. And I had a 2.5-year-old at home who was very, needed a lot from me in terms of like sensory needs and, a big cuddler, like what's to complain about? But I really struggled when my second son was born with my mental health. I had postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, and I've always dealt with anxiety. And when my first son was born, there was some of that, but it wasn't, with both of them, it didn't really come through in the ways that I had kind of seen other moms experience it. Or, when you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, these are what to watch for with postpartum depression. It wasn't really, I didn't have the same experience. And so it took me a little bit to realize, okay, this is something I need to really address. And when I started addressing my mental health and kind of working on myself and trying to figure out how to get in touch with like what I needed and what I wanted, it led me on this kind of journey of self-discovery. And I got really into just learning about motherhood and learning about the experiences of moms and why we feel mom guilt and why, like, there's so much context with all of this. And I just got really into that and decided that this is really what I want to do. And I want to support moms. And so I became a mindset coach for moms. And I really do kind of rely on kind of an educational standpoint with it, because I do think so much of the conversation is understanding that it's not all us. It's not like, oh, I feel guilt when I'm not taking care of something because of me. It's really, no, I'm part of a greater context that has put that responsibility, that role and responsibility on mothers, and that there's an expectation out there of what that means to be a mom that is really, like, if we look at all of what it means to be a perfect mom, it's impossible. There's no mom out there who is doing all of the things, because a lot of it is contradictory, right?
I was gonna say it's so contradictory. Yeah. Like a good mom is like a role model who has a strong career, but it's also at home with the kids.
Yeah,
it's like,
I mean, that's right there. It's like that's a huge one. It's like, it doesn't work. You can't be everything to everyone all the time. So I'm so passionate about, like, having conversations on a larger scale, but also working with individual moms to make sure that they can really, like, infuse that mindset into their own lives.
Yeah. That guilt is, something that I remember posting on Facebook, something about mom guilt within the first month of my son's life.
Yeah.
And I don't remember, I wasn't even specific on Facebook. Whatever the post was something about mom guilt is real, or mom guilt has set in, or something along those lines. And it's like, at the time I didn't know, about the stuff that you were just saying, the outside, influences into this. And sometimes it's how we were raised and the things that we saw are happening with our mom and so on and so forth. But it didn't hit me like, oh, mom guilt is this big thing 10 years ago when I posted that. But I saw the memory, 3 years ago, and I was like, whoa, it hit like quick. So now I make the joke that they hand you a baby and a sack of mom guilt, because it's how that feels. And then, there's postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety that isn't talked about very much. And it's like, there's a lot of prenatal care for moms, and there's not a lot of postnatal care.
No.
Or postnatal education, or, anything like that. We should do that. Start postnatal education. So kind of like, they have what to expect when you're expecting, and then what to expect in the first year. And I haven't read either of those books, so maybe, maybe I should. But I feel like there's this gap that creates this pit of despair that moms fall into.
Well, and I think so much, like, we just kind of assume, I mean, I always say, like, there's just certain things that I figured that when you became a mom, you just were good at. Like, my mom can always find things. Like, she probably got really good at it. She had 3 girls and we were always losing things. So it probably was, I don't know if she was naturally good at that just growing up, but, like, it probably was a skill that she developed. I was sure that, like, that would be something that moms are just good at. I don't know. I'm horrible at it. And so it's like, even just those kind of things, like silly little things where it's like, oh, when you become a mom, you're gonna be able to juggle, like, holding the toddler and, the baby carrier and all these things. Like, you're just going to be able to do it. Like, these silly things that it's like, well, why is that so hard for me? I don't want to go anywhere because, like, actually doing it is difficult. And so is there something wrong with me? Am I not, like, good enough? And am I not going to be able to give my kids the experiences they want because these things are hard for me? Just, it's it's big things and little things that we just kind of take in what we see other moms doing and what we think that other moms should be doing, and internalize that. And there's not really education on why that is. We don't learn about like the psychology behind it and the mindset things that really play a role in our experiences as moms. And we deal with it along with every other mom.
Yeah. I remember having the car seat and the diaper bag and the baby, and just thinking like, I hate carrying stuff. Yeah. And that's all I do now is carry stuff. Like, it was probably the most irritating thing at the time. But then I also remember breastfeeding. A friend of mine and I, we were talking yesterday about, the baby stage. And I really did like the baby stage. I was self-employed. I could set my own schedule. I had a really great support system. And I just remember feeling like I could have done the first 6 months for the rest of my life, because he wasn't moving. He was sleeping all the time. He was sleeping, frequently and very well. And, he didn't move on his own. Did I say that? No, he just stayed still.
Right?
Right? It's like, I could just put him in the swing and go and do stuff, And I was like, I could do that for the rest of my life. And she was like brought to tears with the breastfeeding conversation. And that wasn't even something that I had thought about in a long time, was, the pressure to be covered up, and she didn't want to cover. And so she just wouldn't go anywhere. And then she had certain places she could go that were like, we don't care, just be uncovered. And my experience was, somewhat being chastised for not covering up or not wanting to cover up, or, being compared to other people who also had children at the same time. Well, she goes in the other room and, isolates herself. And I was like, that to me, isolating myself is worse than death at that time of my life. Totally. Would have been worse than death, because I was so connected, and I needed that connection.
Yeah. And it's something people. That it's when you have a young baby, you really have to be intentional about that, because it's not always easy to have that connection with other adults because you're consumed. So I totally get that. And even if, that conversation about breastfeeding and the covering or not covering, it's like, then if you're choosing to cover, but you want to be able not to, and then you feel the guilt for not showing up in a way that you want, even though society is telling you something different. Do you know what I mean? Like
that feeling authentic to yourself.
Yeah. And feeling like, oh, am I not standing up for something that I should be, because I don't want to have to cover up in public. I don't think that's right. But if I feel uncomfortable because I don't want anyone to come up to me, so I choose to cover up. And then am I supporting a viewpoint that I don't agree with, and things like that. It's just really, it's a lot of, you can't win.
Yeah. And that statement is so heavy, because we feel it, and we feel like, I can't win. And then, everybody, as a new mom, everybody wants to weigh in on you. And, and even that can feel overwhelming. And I believe that the weighing in does come from a genuine place of love and caring and wanting what's best for you and your baby. And how you receive it oftentimes is, a personal thing. It's often also how it's presented. Yeah. It depends on the situation, but it's hard, because I did have to set boundaries in my life where, there were people giving me opinions, and I felt a pressure at the time that I needed to do the things that people suggested that I do.
Yeah.
And certain people, I was completely against their suggestions. And so instead of feeling this like tug of, well, I should try what they're saying because they told me to, and then being authentic to myself, I asked this person, or I told this person, I will come to you if I need advice. I am not afraid of asking for help. I will come to you if I need it. And, you know, I was fortunate that she respected that, and she really didn't give me advice. To this day, I would say she kind of like tries to do the backdoor roundabout of advice, but I'm okay with that because I also know that I don't have to listen to her if I don't want to. You know, we are on very different spectrums of, you know, spanking and not spanking. And I'm aware of that. And that's one of the reasons that I asked for not to give me advice anymore, because we differed on that opinion. And it's like, I don't need you to constantly be telling me, hey, you need to spank your kid. You know,
you're not going to do it. And so it's just one more thing that,
to carry around, right? Yeah. So I feel like I interrupted you in the middle of your story, but it was a good conversation, so I don't feel bad about it. So where did you, where was the switch? So you said you got into being a mindset coach. How did that come about? Where did you?
So I started a blog while I was on maternity leave. And as a teacher, I was on maternity leave and then went on to summer break. And so I had this long chunk of time. And I really, in my kind of self-discovery process, you know, that I was going through, really realized that I'm the kind of person, like, I love constantly learning. If you could pay me to go to school forever, that's probably the career choice I would choose. I just love like learning. I love learning and discussing things. Like, this is awesome. Coming here and just talking, kind of learning from each other is so powerful. And so I wasn't really getting that need. I mean, it's really a need. I wasn't getting that need met. And so I was like, how can I do something where I'm like productive and learning and expanding what I'm doing? And so I started a blog about supporting moms, and I learned how to use WordPress and all this stuff. And it was really cool. And I just, like, I knew that teaching wasn't where I wanted to be. It wasn't filling me up the way that I wanted it to be. It was draining a lot of my energy. And so I was still teaching, but I knew that I had like found really something that I'm like, I am so passionate about this. I am so passionate about this conversation. And just trying to kind of think about how to do something more and to really bring that passion and that desire to help people into a way that I could actually do that in my life. I have a family member who's a life coach and is really awesome, really pretty amazing with her practice. And I really value like what she does. And so I talked to her and kind of, you know, I realized like this is something that I can do and I can make a difference for people who need this. And I mean, what mom doesn't need someone in her corner to help her advocate for herself?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was kind of how I got into, like, my story is that I felt unsupported. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, every mom needs support. And so that's how I became the mom support coach. You know, it was that simple, just like that. No struggles whatsoever involved.
Oh, I got a good name.
What's that?
You got a good name for it too. Like,
I did. Yeah. And so what is your favorite form of self-care, or do you have multiple that you pick from?
You know, I really think that when I define self-care. I really just think of it as taking care of yourself. And so for me, similarly to how you said earlier, for me, like having time and space to myself is huge. With my second son, when he was born, I think a big reason I really struggled as much as I did in the early stages was that even when he would be napping and my husband would take our then 2.5-year-old out of the house, I still wasn't alone. And I still had the responsibility of the baby who was napping downstairs. You know, it was kind of, it's like, I wasn't truly alone. And so for me, getting time to myself is huge. Just time to kind of like shut everything out. That's a huge thing for me. I love listening to podcasts. That for me, again, I really like kind of learning and stuff. So that's a huge, if I can like learn something in a podcast episode, that's self-care. But also making sure I get enough sleep, making sure that I am, you know, eating food regularly and, you know, taking care of myself in those basic ways that sometimes kind of fall through the cracks. But I really like to think of self-care as giving ourselves the time to check in with what we need and then to get those needs met and asking for help if that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. And like you, I'm constantly listening to things for educational purposes. And I'm very fascinated right now with the Myers-Briggs personality types. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but I was listening to something today, and that's relevant to what you said about asking for help. And it's like a lot of times we don't ask for help because we don't want to appear weak or whatever else. Like I can't even think of what else we would think about ourselves. But if you ask me for help, it makes me feel good that I can help you.
Yeah.
It makes me feel appreciated and needed, you know, and it doesn't make me think that you're weak, right? So we put these projections onto other people about what they're thinking about us if we ask for help, when really we're robbing them from the opportunity of feeling these good feelings that I mentioned.
Well, and
by not asking for help. And connection, yeah.
Connection is such a huge part of like the human experience, right? And so like we forget about that sometimes. Like we're not meant to be like doing this humaning or motherhood or any of it by ourselves. Like there's like, we need support. And so there's so many ways that we can get that support. And there's so many things that we can ask for help, whether it's having someone take the kids for a bit, or, you know, going to a therapist or going to a coach, or, I mean, there's so many things that we can do to get support. And it looks like so many different things, but really, yeah, kind of ridding ourselves of that mindset that there's something wrong with asking for help, when it really is natural for us to need support and connection. And I mean, all of it.
Yeah. I think community is another word that kind of came to my mind, that, you know, there's a couple of things that I'm curious about that I haven't found the answer to yet. Not that I've like Google searched it or anything, but I want to know where this idea came from, that we're supposed to do it all as moms. Like, where did that come from? Was that like the feminist movement, or like where did it come from, where we decided that we have to do it all on our own and that we don't need a village to raise our children, you know? And the other thing is like, is that like, where did that come from, where we became so isolated to these walls that we live in? Like, this is all, everything, every need that I need, that I have must be taken care of by my significant other. like if I, what's that?
It's our little world or something.
Yeah.
Everything has to happen. Yeah. It's so fascinating to think about. And you think about like, this is something that I'm really interested in exploring. And it's something I'm like actively learning about. Your question, I'm like, oh, this is so like something that I'm actually like trying to research right now. But it's interesting just thinking about how life has changed in the past. You can even think like, okay, since your grandparents' generation or since your parents' generation, but then going back like, okay, let's say 200 years, like society, like the way that work was, right? Like going to work was different than it is now. So it's just, there's so many things, and it's like this, looking back, there's so many things that kind of squeezed us into kind of the box that we feel placed in, of like expectations and what we have to do, what our roles are supposed to be. And it's so fascinating just to think like, oh, this exact role, there were other things, right? Gender norms, but this exact role and expectation of what it means to be a mom couldn't have been the same 200 years ago. It couldn't have been close to the same, because our world is so different. And it's fascinating to really think about that. And it takes a lot off of our shoulders, right? Like it can kind of feel helpless at times, but it also is like, it also takes that off of us, that there's so many factors for why we experience the guilt we feel when we're not living up to some standard, because it's a long time in the making what that standard is.
Yeah, we don't know where it came from. There's a book that I'm kind of reading right now that's called It Didn't Start With You, and it's about the generational traumas, and which is just fascinating. I stopped at the point where it was talking about some of the trauma that happens in utero, and they recommended a different book, and I was like, let me read this book because I'm pregnant right now. How do I not create some trauma in these babies, right? But it's interesting because we create there. What popped into my mind was that we used to live with our parents.
Yeah.
Right? Like we used to have the grandparents helping with the children. Yeah. And there's this movement of being independent and
like individualism.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know that I would have wanted to live with my parents my whole life. And then whose parents do you live with? His or yours? And then there's the divorce adding in, like, do you live with your mom and alienate your dad, or vice versa? Like all that.
Yeah, like it's a whole other set of issues, but
and then do you get along with your mother-in-law? And all those kinds of things, but like I feel like there's part of, we might have to, just with the way that prices are going up everywhere, might have to go back to a place where we have two families inside a home. And I don't know that that's such a bad thing.
Well, and it's an interesting thing that there's a stigma around that, right? Like that is a negative thing in our society, but you're like, well, yeah, but that's how historically it was. And really, like historically, I can't speak to like how far back, but like really I think that's just like in general, like historically, like going back really far, like that's how it was. And I think in other cultures that's how it may still be. Like you have a village to raise your children and to support you, right? And it's so far from like what is normal and normalized right now. And it is interesting to think like why that is, what specifically in our context has created this new normal, and who does that benefit?
Right. There's another book that I haven't finished. I'm one of those, I start a book and then get squirrel. But I've mentioned it a couple times on the podcast, but it's called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And it's a mom who was kind of at the end of her rope. And so she ended up traveling to different cultures and learning about how parenting happens in other cultures. And it all leads back to, that it takes a village. Yeah. And that's the premise of the book. And so one of these days I'll finish it. So is there a piece of advice that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, if there's one thing that you take from this conversation, I really think that it is crucial that we understand that we have to have our needs met. We have to be taken care of. We have to prioritize ourselves. As moms, that is so important to do. I think about I know it's pretty cliche, but the oxygen mask on an airplane, where you can't help someone else if you can't breathe, right? Like, you can't help someone else if your needs aren't being met. You have to take care of your needs first. And we get a lot of messages about how we need to always be putting our kids first. We need to always be putting our partners first, our homes first, our work first. Like, there's so many messages that come to us. But knowing that it can't work like that. Our needs have to be met. And just a little piece of that is that needs look like different things. It's not always just basic needs. We really need to be doing things that fill our cups, that make us feel fulfilled as a human. And sometimes it takes a lot of self-work to know what those things are. It's not always obvious what we need. But when our needs are met, we can show up in a way that is more in line with how we want to show up for our families.
Yeah. I agree completely. And the first time that concept really kind of landed with me was, there's, I know it was Rachel Hollis that was she did that movie in between her first and second book, I think. And there was a clip of her saying that if you give from the overflow, so if you have a vase that's half empty and you're giving and you're giving and you're giving, and then the vase is empty, right? But if you're constantly pouring into the vase, then the vase will overflow, and you can give from the overflow, which means that you're never under 100%.
Yeah.
If you're constantly filling the vase. But if your vase is half empty and you're giving from it, and you get to the bottom and you haven't stopped giving, you're giving emptiness.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Snapping, yelling, getting angry, it's like these giving to people. The bomb explodes and you're hitting people with the shrapnel that don't deserve it, right?
What a powerful image too, just that idea.
Yeah I remember that she said the filling the vase thing, and I repeated it at a conference I was at, and the leader of the conference was like, yeah, and you're given from the emptiness. And I was like, oh, that's so good. Like, that we don't want to do that, It's such a good visual. That
as moms, we want to give to our kids. That's, I think, a lot of the reason a lot of moms kind of run themselves empty is because they want to keep giving. And so if you can reframe how you take care of yourself as being able, we should be able to take care of ourselves because we are worthy of care, but also if you want to just, if it's easier to like say, because I want to be able to give to my kids, I mean, that works too, right?
And it's also, you know, in the intro of my show that you're demonstrating self-care. So how do you want your kids to grow up and treat themselves? Because if you're constantly running yourself ragged, what do you think your kids are going to do when they grow up and have kids of their own?
I mean, I get chills thinking about that. I think about that a lot, like about just like how I was my kids, right? Like we all were children, and I mean, I could cry thinking about it. It's just if we want something for our children, and we have to show them that, and we have to show them humanity in ourselves so that they can know that when they hit a time where things are hard, or when they are feeling like they need to just give to others, it's like, okay, no, I know that that's not how to treat myself. And yeah, I get chills. I love the intro of your podcast. I love just the way that you speak on that, because it's so powerful.
Yeah, I had to stop listening to it because it would make me cry when I listen to it. Actually, I think it made my mom cry. And yeah, the showing our kids our humanity. I'm sure my son gets tired of me losing my cool and then coming back and explaining to him why I lose my cool and apologizing. I don't even know if he gets tired of it. I'm not going to stop doing it because it's important for me that he know that I'm not snapping at him because he's a bad kid, because anything disempowering. I want him to know that these are my things. Mm-hmm. And you know, it happened last night, and I explained to him that this right here is one of my triggers. And I actually was trying to think of a different word than trigger. And he was like, trigger? It's like, oh, I guess I have used that word with you.
Well, for him to be able to repeat that back to you and to kind of to understand it, to be able to help you explain it.
And he does it back to me now too, where if he loses his temper, when he calms down, I never have to tell him to apologize to someone or to me or to, you know, my boyfriend or anybody when he loses his temper, because he knows that when you lose your temper, you figure out why and you say you're sorry and you explain it to him.
That's so much better than some
sweeping it under the rug or disingenuous.
Or sorry, like it doesn't, like that's just what you do.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, and how cool to like for a kid to grow up knowing that it's okay to lose your cool and recover from that that's being human. Like
it's part of the human experience. It's not my favorite part, but it's part of the human experience. Is there a book that's been really impactful in your personal development journey?
Yeah, so I when you were talking about kind of jumping from books, I love it because I feel that. I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I started it quite a while ago, and I had to kind of stop. It was I think it was before I got pregnant with my second son that I started reading it, and it was just a lot for me. The way she talks about kind of breaking free of the expectations, really. And I picked it back up again after my second son was born, and just I need to reread it again because it's so powerful, and it's been really, I think that it's a good one to come back to, just in understanding that we have to take care of ourselves as people and as moms. And then another one that just has been really impactful for me in my own kind of understanding of what my message is and what I value is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. Just the way that she defines certain things like worthiness, and she defines so much in that book, like literally defining words in a way that is, it hits differently. It's pretty powerful. And so those two books, they're very different from one another, but they both, I think, show a humanity and show a level of grace for being human, and knowing that we have to do that. We have to give ourselves that grace and that compassion. And so I'd say those two, they're big ones.
Yeah, I like the defining piece. It's hard for me to put into words, especially my son asks, well, what's that mean? And I'm like, I don't know, I gotta Google it. But I think that what you're talking about is, I think it's important to define certain things, like what is a good mom?
Mm-hmm.
Not what is a good mom to your mom. What is a good mom to your nosy neighbor down the street? What does it mean to you to be a good mom? And are you striving to do that? Yeah. And, if your definition, so I wrote a book about mom guilt. And I talked about the definition of being a good mom, and like, if your definition has, a good mom stays at home with her kids, but you have to work.
Yeah.
Because you're a 2-income household, or you're a single mom, or whatever the case may be. There needs to be a reframe. You have to find a new definition of what a good mom is, because in that situation, you're still a good mom.
Yeah.
Because you're taking care of your kids' needs. There's needs that you're fulfilling by working.
Yeah, it's what's the alternative, right? It's like you're making choices because they're the best choices that you can make.
Yeah.
I think that's the way we define things, and the way we use language it's a whole other conversation, right? It's like a whole, it's so important to understand what we're putting behind these ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, and where they came from. I think there's a lot of power inside what's the word I'm looking for? Defining words and searching for the origin. Yeah. And sometimes you'll never know all of the things that you do, that where things come from, but there is a come from.
Mm-hmm.
And it came from, if it's a negative, I think, in your life, it came from pain, and it's okay to release it. And because we don't need to carry all that around with us.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. And this conversation has been beautiful. And this is why I do the podcast and continue to do the podcast, because I just love these conversations, and I get so much out of them. And I hope that, the people eavesdropping in that are our listeners are getting something out of it also.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. I'm so grateful to get to talk about these things.
I love it. I could do this all day.
I'm right there with you.
Right. All right. Well, we can't keep everybody for all day, so we'll have to sign off. But thank you again. And we will have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you next week. And until then, keep healing.
Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AliciaLyons.com. That's ALYSIALYONS.com. See you next time.